Hello, welcome to episode 7 of Dare to Speak, difficult conversations that can change your life. They're difficult conversations that can change everything. Difficult conversations that can open possibilities between you and another person or you and yourself. See, difficult conversations are points of change in our life. They're often points of transformation. When we look back in our lives, we can often see that it was a difficult conversation that somebody had with us or that we had with somebody else that shifted the direction and the course of our lives. This podcast, Dare to Speak, Difficult Conversations That Can Change Everything, is about those difficult conversations. But it's also about how to have them. One of my clients said to me a long time ago, she said, the difference with you, Eve, is that you don't just say that we need to speak. You talk about how to go about doing it. This is the beginning of my podcast, and I am super excited to have it out here. But these first 7 episodes are here to give you an opportunity to kind of dive into my world a little bit, to get to know me, so that we can meet each other on the shoreline or wherever you want to imagine it, wherever you are while you're listening, and meet with me where I am, where I'm spend my time working with people, talking to rooms full of people sometimes at the same time, talking to people on Zoom, talking to people in the UK, in America, in Australia, wherever it happens to be, about a topic which has interested me all of my life, which is the topic of difficult conversations, how we speak and how we understand the internal worlds of other people. Using this podcast, whatever this podcast comes to mean for you, I don't know. But what I do know is that this podcast is my opportunity to share with you what I've learned along the way about difficult conversations. My son once said to me, well, who's your favourite philosopher? And I'm like, oh, who asked that question? Nobody asked me enough. But one of my favourite philosophers is a guy called Ludwig Wittgenstein. Hard to spell. I like Wittgenstein for a couple of reasons. I like Wittgenstein because when he was about 21, he thought he had all the answers. And he basically said there's no need to do philosophy anymore because I've answered all the questions. I think he was slightly over 21, but he was quite a young man. And then he went away and did a load of other things and then came back to it later in his life and went, oh, okay, I haven't quite finished philosophy. I need to come back. And then he came back to philosophy. And first of all, I like anybody who can be willing to be reflective enough to go back and say to themselves, maybe I didn't quite finish all of that. But what I also like about him is that he realized that the conversation wasn't done. He hadn't finished. Because if you could solve all of philosophy in a couple of years, then, well, that would be interesting. Because what philosophy is about how we think and how we speak and how we come to understand the world. And it's only recently that I started describing myself as a philosopher. So you might think, what is she going on about now? I'm talking about this because the way of using this podcast and the way of understanding this podcast is recognizing the underpinnings in thought and in the history of thought and in the history of language and the way that we speak and the history of relationships. There's a long history trying to understand how my mind and what I think is different from your mind and what you think. And this isn't about cultural differences or racial differences, although those are factors. They definitely, even different languages have different ways of expressing the same thought or idea. Daring to speak is about what we do when what I am trying to express or say causes conflict or causes the potential or the fear of conflict or shutdown. Daring to speak. Speaking out in a situation that's really open and easy where we can all openly chat, there's very little daring. I mean, maybe if you've got an opinion to say that's really controversial, that might be difficult. But we've seen in society some kind of really big areas. Brexit was a really big thing where people just, families stopped talking to each other about whether they voted to stay or leave the European Union. I got work because of Brexit. I was working at the time and I had individuals coming to see me because the rift in the conversation, the unwillingness to understand the other person's perspective, or be able to state their own, actually caused families to break down. Maybe that's something that you remember or you resonate with. It happens at a macro level. It happens at a really big level, but it also happens at an individual level in families. The reason why I'm talking about this in episode 7 of this podcast is because when we're looking at daring to speak and when we're looking at difficult conversations, and a lot of the work I do is around separation and divorce and family breakdown. And there's a reason for that, partly because those are things I've experienced in my life and I've seen the impact on them, but also because what happens in those, that legacy of those difficult conversations is it can travel around families in really devastating ways. But at the nub and at the heart of it is how we have a really difficult conversation. And just as there were families that broke up because of Brexit, when separation and divorce happens, cousins can stop seeing each other because the husband has nieces and nephews and the wife has nieces and nephews, and they all used to come together and celebrate, but after the divorce, they no longer see each other. Grandparents, devastated. Because when the relationship breaks down, they no longer be able to see their grandkids, or because they're no longer able to see their daughter-in-law or their son-in-law because now they're not married anymore. And so there can be no relationship, so they're gone. But these are people that we love and care about. So difficult conversations do matter. In a little micro way, it can be that frustration because you keep asking for some help. You don't want to be the one that books the holiday and then listens to the complaints when the other person is unhappy with the fact that you went all-inclusive and they don't like the food in the hotel. But it can also be around really, really bigger things like how are we going to separate and divorce in such a way that when our child is graduating, we can both be at the graduation ceremony. Or that our child can feel safe to get married. I have worked with numerous couples who haven't got married because they have been terrified of one thing, and that's their divorced parents being in the same place during the wedding. And because they can't choose which parent to invite and they can't bear the thought of the conflict, they don't get married. This is a reality. It's a real thing that's really happening. So this podcast is a space where I am going to talk very, very specifically about how do I clarify and communicate. I spoke with somebody recently and they want to spend Christmas by themselves with their spouse, not with their parent. They don't want their parent to be there because they don't get on. Secretly, I suspect the parent doesn't want to be there either, but because of social pressures, they will feel like they should be together. Another difficult conversation. Difficult conversations show up all over the place. The difficult conversation about somebody who wants to be able to quash gossip at work about why they've been off sick, but they don't know how to say it in a way that doesn't lead to further difficult conversations, or the difficult, heartbreaking conversation of somebody who needs to say, I'm really ill, very, very ill. And I need to be able to tell you about it and manage your emotional reaction because actually I'm feeling pretty bad about it myself. Difficult conversations come in all shapes and forms. The difficult conversation of saying to somebody, listen, you're getting older. Have you got a will? No, I'm not trying to inherit all your stuff. I just want to know whether or not I'd like to know what your wishes are. Or I'd like you to put in place a power of attorney so if you did get ill, I can help you out. Another difficult conversation. So the best way of using this podcast is I'm going to make the titles as clear as possible so that you know which episodes might be relevant to you in your particular situation. I'm going to make the show notes as clear as possible so that you'll be able to search. I have said, and I'm going to continue to say, that if there's a topic you want me to cover, let me know. There are so many ways that you can contact me. Go to my websites, www.evestanway.co.uk, and message me. You can WhatsApp me. You can book a call with me. You can email me. You can find me on social media. I'm all over the place. I was lucky enough to get the handle Eve Stanway across most social media. So you'll be able to find me, although for some unknown reason I'm Evie Stanway on Facebook, but it should still find me at Eve Stanway. But reach out. The way to use this podcast is to listen, if that's good for you, and you will hear loads of good things come up. Another way of using this podcast is interact with me. Make it a two-way communication. That's a great way of using this podcast. Another way is read my book and then ask some questions. Go have a look at the resources. Take a look at the blogs and the case studies. Let me know what you need to know. Another way of using this podcast is to be able to listen as I explain these difficult conversations. And when something comes up that particularly resonates with you, make a note. And if you're a writer and you like journaling, if you like journaling it, journal it out. Look at the prompt. And the prompt would go like this. If you fancy doing this, I invite you to do it. Clarify. What is it that I want? What am I thinking? What is my problem? If my problem is whoever it is, my friend keeps talking about themselves and never asks me about me, or asks me about me, but then literally jumps back to talking about them. If that's my problem, what is it I need? How am I going to frame that in a way that I can communicate it? Because I don't want to say, you never give me any space, you always talking about yourself, why are you so selfish? Equally, I don't want to stop seeing them because I'd like to see if there's any chance of saving the friendship. So the clarifying statement would be this. I am finding our conversations a bit uneven. I feel I'd like more opportunity or more interest to be shown in me and what's happening with me. I'd like a little bit more time spent on my situation. The other person, when you communicate that, might go, oh, well, I did ask you how you were and you didn't say anything. Then we get to correct. And we like correct. Correct is really funny because often correct is where you're going to say, yeah, you're right. You did ask about me and I didn't say very much. You're right. And I'd like to be able to say more. I'd like to be able to, so I'm saying that now. I'd like to be able to do it. Sometimes what we think is that if we agree with the other person, then what we're doing is that we're just letting their opinion ride. But the thing is, people who are being difficult often say stuff. They're clever. They get us to say something that fundamentally we have to agree with, and that shuts the conversation down. So if somebody says to you, well, I did ask you how you were and you didn't say anything. man, you can see why this conversation is going to get difficult. Oh, damn. But if we go, well, you're right, you did ask me, and you're right, I didn't go in a little bit more into my situation because I didn't feel that I could. Or I felt that it wasn't even, actually. I felt that there wasn't much interest in what I was going to say. So I think I probably did stop myself a bit quick. Let me have another go. In that, if you listen to this back, which you can do, I'm being very careful in the language that I'm using to partially agree, because they did ask me how I was and I didn't give an in-depth answer, but I'm still holding to the line that I didn't feel I was getting enough attention or interest in what I was saying. And I'm still maintaining using correct, going back to the original clarity statement, which is that I would like more time spent on my situation. Clarify, communicate, correct. So it does require a little bit of persistence. It requires a little bit of pushback. It requires, and this is the crucial part of the clarity bit. Each bit is crucial. I'm going to talk a lot more about the communicate bit at some point. The clarifying statement is the thing that you return to. The correct statement, the correcting statement, often is where you agree with something that the other person has said. We're going to talk a lot about controlling relationships in this podcast. I'm going to do a full episode on that because it's really important I do. The correct is going back to the original clarifying statement. The communicate is staying it. Anybody who's tricky and difficult is going to come up with some kind of answer that will be confounding or confusing. Or they may just shut you down or tell you that you're stupid. I've heard that. Or you're being irrelevant, or you're just being sensitive, or you're just being emotional. Oh, it's just because you're menopausal, it's because you've got your period, it's because you're a man and you don't know how to talk. Whatever it is, the particular flavour that you've been given. Okay. We're still going to go back. And we're going to go back to the clarifying statement. So a good way of using this podcast is to think about your own difficult conversations, see how you can work it out. As we go through these podcasts, you're going to get better and better at doing this. And I'm going to leave you today. This is a skill. Difficult conversations is a skill. Anybody can master it. It will be harder for some people and it will be easier for other people. You'll need to exert more effort to have difficult conversations in some context and some scenarios, and you'll find that you get really quick results in another. The fundamental process, though, of clarify, communicate, correct, being calm, emotional regulation, thinking where you use emotional regulation and transferring it into this environment, those are going to remain kind of fairly stable throughout the course of this podcast. The individual application and how we do them is going to vary. So the best way of using this podcast is, first of all, listen to some of the others so that you understand. Ask me questions by reaching out to me. Try it and try and work out what your clarify, communicate, correct is. Try it. It takes a little bit of time to get it right, but once you do get it right, you can use it again and again and again. It's the most versatile of tools. We're going to discuss the philosophy of it, the psychology, the history of difficult conversations, emotional regulation, child development, relationship dynamics, coercive control, abuse, workplace scenarios, bullying, how that works, shutdown. We're going to go into neurodivergence, different character types, different sensitivities. We're going to go into all these different areas during this podcast. And we're going to maintain our focus on difficult conversations and on daring to speak. So you can see that this is probably where you might want to go and get a journaling book or some kind of notebook to be using alongside this podcast. And I really encourage you. One of the things I've noticed is that over the years is that a lot of people that I work with, they do start writing stuff down. And writing stuff down is interesting. When we speak, it goes out of our mouth and back into our ears. And what that means is our brains are really interesting. And we'll talk about that at some point. But when we say something and then we receive it back through our ears, we process the information differently. When we write stuff down, it comes out through our fingers and then it comes back into our eyes. And then we process it differently. So do reach for a pen and paper. Do record stuff if that's going to be helpful for you. Please do reach out. If this episode has resonated in any way, take a breath and let that sink in. Please do connect with me. Look at my other resources. Please share this podcast. I really want this podcast to have a global reach because I know there are people who are sitting alone with difficult conversations. So share it. Please share it. Because there may be somebody out there who really needs to hear something in this podcast. And giving is the same as receiving in so many ways. So if you can share, if you can like it, I really appreciate it. If there's something you want me to talk about, please do reach out and let me know. I'm going to say that again and again because I really, really mean it. So take care of yourself and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. All the best.